Hello, and welcome to our webinar series today, Marketing Data and Analytics. Why is it not delivering on its promises, and what can we do about it? My name is Elizabeth Birch, and I am the Vice President of Customer Experience at Instapage, and I am joined by a few wonderful speakers. First of all, we have Luke Fife, who's the Director of Business Development, North America for ClickData. We have Fergus Lovett, who is the Director of Business Development for UK and Ireland for ClickData. And last but certainly not least, we have Lavina Bhatia, who is the Manager of Analytics and CRM Measurement at Wunderman Thompson. So guys, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So the way that today is going to work is we're going to have a bit of a panel discussion. We've got some questions that have come in. And I'll pose them each to our speakers here. And just, I want you to all be aware that this particular webinar is based on the findings of a report that ClickData has put together in partnership with ClickSee and introduces the fact that, there's no denying that data analytics has moved into the mainstream. ClickData has found that over 80% of marketing professionals deem data analytics highly important or absolutely critical. And moreover, nearly 90% use it for important projects or the majority of projects or even always. Data equips marketers and marketing managers to tackle everything from lead generation to customer retention. And yet, more than 65% of marketers admit to relying on spreadsheets or standard reporting apps. The outcome of that really is shocking. Less than 45% of marketers rate the value of their marketing data analytics tools and systems as high or very high. So despite their move to the mainstream, data analytics tools are not yet adding the value that we would expect. And with budgets under even greater scrutiny than ever, and over 80% expecting the usage of data analytics tools to increase slightly or significantly in the next 2 to 3 years, filling this knowledge gap should truly be a priority. So, what we're all here for is to ask some questions and have you guys provide us with some insight. Now, the report showed us that the data analytics has grown in popularity and is now part of the wheelhouse of marketing leaders. And over 90% of respondents use analytics always for the majority of projects or for important projects. And it's reassuring to know that companies are now more than ever taking a data-led approach rather than relying on instinct. Lavina, how has improved accessibility to data analytics impacted businesses?
Yeah. Well, if I were to answer that question, if I were to give you a quick and short answer, is the ability to make data-driven decisions. Plain and simple. I think, if I were to kind of divide sort of the strategy and approach that we're seeing a lot of companies take kind of pre-COVID and post-COVID, like we do in most, major phenomena, I think the investment and the shift and the priority that is given to analytics, marketing analytics, and digital experiences there's been a very systemic and strategic shift in that. Very intentional to improve not just the customer experience for the players that were already in this industry, like the e-commerce capabilities or retail clients, but more so even the non-traditional players in the field. So we see a massive increase in investment in digital analytics and improving and understanding consumer experiences, their needs, kind of what messages connect with them the most, the products that they're most interested in, kind of their pain points as well, more so in the healthcare, the automotive, telco, pet care. These have seen and garnered tremendous kind of focus in the online and digital experience in terms of how they make decisions and understand their consumers.
Thank you for that, Lavina. Fantastic insights. So we also know that marketing and management are the primary consumers of data, which is being used for a plethora of applications across marketing. And each organization's use case for data analytics will, of course, be different. But the scope of influence, we can all agree, is pretty substantial. So, Fergus, this one to you. What are some of the areas where data analytics is being most widely and successfully used by marketers?
Thanks, Elizabeth. Yeah, I think the Lavina kind of touched on it quite briefly, but it's about being more consumer centric with your approach to marketing. I think that's what a lot of organizations, a lot of brands are seeing now, is they need to be better at using customer data to inform the decisions that they make in terms of their engagement with customers. And I think that's great for the customer, right? I feel like there's been a decrease in the amount of trust that people have when they're giving their data away. I think we've all got that burner email that we might use when we don't necessarily want to give our email to a certain company, and I think that's kind of something that is demonstrated quite well that there is a lack of trust. So anything that marketers can do to claw back that trust in terms of engaging with customers in a way they want to be engaged with, using their data more effectively to drive the decisions that they make and to share content that's relevant with them and share products that are relevant with them, I think is a bonus to everyone, right? It's great for marketers because it means that you can engage with the customers in the way that you want to, and it's great for the consumers because they're being spoken to in a way they want to about things that they want to be spoken about. So I think in general, that's kind of the area where analytics is being most widely successfully used by marketers is talking to customers and understanding customers and engaging with them on their level. So number of use cases around that. I mean, you see, I think a good example is my kind of 66-year-old dad who, has had email for a number of years and has kind of seen the decline in the relevancy of his email inbox. So unsubscribed for a number of different things, but the things he keeps subscribed to now are things that send him communications that are relevant to him, and he always tells me about that. Always complaining to me, Fergus, you work in data. Why do they get it so wrong, and why do they send me such bad things? And he'll point out good examples to me as well, which is a positive. And I'm seeing more good than I'm seeing bad at the moment, which is nice.
Yeah, that's I think about my inbox and I shudder to think about that. But that relevancy in the data that we ask for, that we provide, all speaks to that trust, doesn't it? And you're right, there truly is a lack of trust in what we provide to who nowadays. So, and unfortunately, this is really just one side of the coin, right? The report shows us that over 2/3 of respondents were relying on spreadsheets, guilty, standard app reports, or just kind of multiple reporting tools, and less than 20% use an integrated platform. So the participants that we surveyed reported difficulty with accessing data and customization, high complexity with setup, usage, updating, and sharing. And so, in short, plenty of companies are talking the talk, but they're failing to walk the walk. So this would be interesting for both Fergus, for you and Luke to respond to. What are some of the more common challenges that you're hearing from customers about running marketing data analytics? And before you chime in, the folks that are attending, if you would just, pop some of those questions into our question box here. We are watching that regularly. So pop your questions in. But Luke and Fergus, what are you hearing?
Yeah, so those problems are pretty wide and varied, right? But subjectively, when I think about the customer conversations that I've had, I'd really break it down to probably 3 core problems that in a lot of ways build upon themselves, right? First and foremost, I would say of a lot of the different personas and types of disciplines that I've interacted with in the past, marketers are busy. And not just like, someone likes to think that they're busy, but no, you are in high demand across the organization, right? And so when you think about compression of time, your deep work that you need to do, deep thinking, strategic thinking, typically those things, because they're not urgent, even though they are important, get compressed and almost pushed to the back burner, right? So I see that pretty consistently, of just the demand for time outstripping the ability to meet, in a more innovative type requests, right? Which then leads to just a maintenance of the status quo, right? So when you have a lack of time, it's totally understandable to when you get proposed a better way of doing something, that it's just overwhelming to think about taking on something else. I'm sure everybody can attest to that here, which then ultimately leads to technology being the core issue, right? When you look at the way that our world works today, technology really is the place where the rubber meets the road. In a few examples, just recently over the past few months, there was a consulting firm that I was working with that was trying to build a very simple application that would drive a lot of revenue for the organization. 7 months with an organization and not even an MVP or an alpha to speak of. It was a technology issue. Worked with a payment system provider where they had been working with Power BI for 9 months just to deliver to their stakeholders across the organization simple marketing reporting that continues to justify their investment and further investment in what marketing is doing, right? And just recently, went with Click Data because of the simplicity they've seen in past jobs that they could actually deliver on the technology promise, right? And lastly, a law firm out on the East Coast, same thing, 7 months with Power BI, even having a third party that they'd invested tens of thousands of dollars with. And the technology was hindering them from delivering on their promise. And so what we see is really technology either delivers on the promise of data or where it's, where the value falls short. So, without the right technology, operating your marketing strategy based off data will just simply not happen.
Yeah, that's great insight. Luke, Fergus, what have you seen there?
I think further to Luke's point, I think one of the biggest challenges that I hear about is adoption being a huge struggle. I feel like a lot of investment goes into technology from all levels of organizations, but in particular from higher up in organizations. And then it becomes really difficult to adopt technology for whatever reason. It might be a training issue, it might be an issue with implementation. It might just be that people haven't really bought into it as a concept at an organization. But I think that's kind of one of the main things I come across. There's ways around that, right? There are strategies to cope with that, but I think one of the main things is just ensuring that the organization sees the value of data and analytics, which is becoming more common now, thankfully. And kind of to Lavina's initial point, it's something which is being picked up fast, but oftentimes at kind of the lower levels of organizations, where, Elizabeth, to your point, you've got your spreadsheet, you're quite happy with it. The idea of picking up a brand new piece of technology where you haven't been sold the dream of the kind of it's going to solve all your problems and make your life easier, can be a huge challenge. And oftentimes it means that investment into data and analytics falls by the wayside and doesn't deliver the value that it should.
Yeah, well, and it goes back to that earlier comment, first, that you made around relevancy. Making sure that we're getting the right data to the right people, and then that they use it, and that can always be tricky as well. So yeah, so this should be concerning to marketers, right? 60% of respondents rate the value add of their marketing data analytics as moderate, low, or very low, which is such a high proportion of marketers, and they're recognizing the power of marketing data analytics. But there's just this huge gulf in expectations versus reality. Lavina, what do you think is the root cause behind the lack of trust that marketers have behind their data?
Oh, That's a heavy question. I think you hit a nerve. For a lot of marketers who are listening and on this call as well, with that, because that is such a pain point for anybody who's been, working in this industry. Because very often when you're faced with making a decision and you're looking for true marketing insight on it, it's fair to say that a lot of people don't trust that information, because a lot of time that information is incorrect, incomplete, out of context, um, and just untimely. I think coming back to Luke's point earlier, marketers are busy. That decision making needs to be fast, and if we're working with data that's outdated, incorrect, and used out of context, then in terms of the actual decision making that's done with that information, with that data, is not going to be very effective anyway. So yeah, here, yes, very often that data is not trustworthy, and it really speaks to the need for unified data and technology strategy. Fergus hit on the point of like adoption. I think that that really speaks to that as well. I think as marketers and decision makers, I think we need to ask, starting, hey, what data do we have? What data are we collecting? What purpose it serves? How complete is it? Is it accurate information? What's the quality of this data? Where is it coming from? And are we looking at the whole picture of information? Because very often we see, especially with large organizations and even small ones, that data exists in silos, right? There's no connectivity. It doesn't speak to each other. So for organizations and marketers to make sense of it, it can become quite a challenge. And given all of this information, how are we going to process, synthesize, and draw insights from this data? I think that is key, because if we get to that question after the data has been collected, and like is sitting there, I think it becomes a challenge that is compounded in terms of the time and effort that it's going to take to process it. And with that, how does it tie to the organizations, the teams, and the enterprise's just overall goals? How does it tie to ROI? How does it tie to the objectives of the business? What purpose does it serve? What is it driving? I think with what we see very often is that we are using information and data and looking at data that's often collected and comes to us without all of the above questions being answered, which is why it's difficult to go anywhere with it. And it's difficult to trust that information, because we don't know where it came from, what the journey was to get to this point, and what it's going to be going from here. So I think that the need for a unified data and technology strategy is essential, especially in today's world.
So I'm sorry, are you saying that we should have a strategy for our data?
Almost.
That's mind-blowing. That's crazy. Yeah, it's funny. Just like you can find the answer to anything on the internet, you can find data to support anything you want it to support, right? And so without that comprehensive strategy and understanding what it is that we're asking, right, where the data is coming from, and making sure that we're not just pulling data in our own little silos. I can't tell you, even here at Instapage, how many times we've all had different answers to the same questions, because we've all pulled data from just a little bit of our own little kingdom. And so without that strategy, it's going to be very hard to use data to move the organization forward. And yet we all agree that it's critical. Yeah. So with all that being said, let's move on to what we can do to enjoy a greater value from our marketing data analytics. Luke, what steps can marketers take to ensure that they and their teams are delivering the full potential that data analytics has promised?
Yeah. So I'm a very foundational up person. I think if you ask anybody who lives anywhere, house or apartment, which is all of us, I think we would all attest to, if your foundation is cracked, then everything else around you is going to fall apart, right? So the but then that begs the question of what is the actual foundation, right? Where's the starting point to actually make use of this and deliver on this promise? Business drives everything. So it starts with the business. What is the business impact? And really the questions that you can ask, what does the business need, and or what are they looking for, right? There was a executive that's a friend of mine that used to work at one of the largest home security companies in the world. And his data science team, put months into predicting a certain outcome, and actually got to a 98% accuracy rate, which in the world of data science is quite impressive. Pitched the idea to the CEO, and the CEO said, "I have absolutely no value for that." And what it was, without getting into the details, is that they simply had predicted something that had absolutely no business value. And so that has to be, first and foremost, very well thought through, is what is the actual impact to the business, and are we delivering something to the business that they either need or are asking for? In kind of maybe 1B to that, when it comes to that outcome, be very focused on what you're trying to accomplish, right? My boss says it this way: if everything is the focus, then you have no focus. So be very specific with what it is that you're actually trying to drive towards. And these two steps will really ultimately define, when it comes to the reporting side of what you're doing, and kind of what that, even format of the dashboard looks like or whatnot, how that looks and feels is really kind of foundationally initially established with those first two steps. Then you kind of get into the, defining of the segment that you're targeting and the outcome for that segment, which will ultimately inform, the channels that you use to make the most out of that initiative, that campaign. And then you can get to the technology piece, right? How is the technology leveraged? What technology are we using? What channels are we tapping into to give us a centralized view? But really, that, in my experience, seeing successful and then unsuccessful projects, really building that foundation in that way ultimately has led to, for those that have followed it, has led to great success. And for those that haven't, has, ultimately led to failure in the lack of delivery of the promise that data can provide. That is obviously what we're discussing today.
Thanks, Luke. That's making sure that we're not building a house on a cracked foundation is pretty critical. And as we discussed at the beginning of this webinar, marketers are recognizing the power of data analytics more so now than ever. This report has also shown us that this will continue into the future, with over 80% of participants indicating that the need for and usage of data analytics will increase or significantly increase over the next 2 to 3 years. So with all that being said, Lavina, what further value do you see data analytics adding to marketing in the next 2 to 3 years? And maybe more importantly, how should marketers prepare for this data-driven future?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think, the things that we're going to see in the near future and are already kind of seeing very largely, in the industry now, the first thing that I've, come across is personalization. The need for personalization and personalized communication and experiences is something that's taking over a lot of, large and small businesses, largely because there's data and, the technology to support it. So it's not something that's, niche or very exclusive like it was, a few years ago, but a lot of organizations are investing and have teams dedicated to understanding consumer needs and experiences better, in order to be able to personalize effectively, and kind of tie the ROI to that. The other thing that we're definitely seeing coming our way is advanced cross-channel analytics, because of the tech and the MarTech solutions in place and available. Providing organizations the capability to do that, and kind of make that data talk to each other and not let it exist at an enterprise level in silos. I think advanced cross-channel analytics tied in with personalization through testing, strategy, and optimization, I think that is going to be huge, and it's really picking up already. I think I'm going to say, the buzzwords AI. I know it's everywhere now, but truly, artificial intelligence is going to have a large role to play. I feel like in our industry as well, and not simply because now it's the big thing now, but it speaks to the need that we have for quicker decision making. I think, we all talked about how, it's important to have timely insights. We're all busy. Marketers are very busy, and that decision making needs to be quick and prompt in order for it to be effective, meaningful. Having the right data at the right time to make those decisions quickly, AI is really speaking to that, speaking to the need for automation, so that we don't have, marketers, like you said, using spreadsheets to like synthesize information in our like own little kingdom, and people doing that in a parallel team in a similar it's ineffective, and it's a major pain point. So I think that providing real-time insights, that decision makers and hopefully the CEO as well, like you said, even though 98% kind of accuracy is not willing to make that decision to that forward, hopefully we're going to see a world where leaders feel like this data is trustworthy and is coming to them at a right time, where they feel confident to move forward with their decisions using that information. And I think the last piece of it is advancing customer and user experience itself. I think one of the largest pieces of investment and kind of strategy shifts that we've seen has been towards UX, with such a large kind of population across the globe moving digital, right? And I'm glad, we're sharing personal stories. My 90-year-old grandpa now is on Instagram, likes to share pictures, always sends emails, and is just like, no, don't send me anything physically because I'm going to look at it online, or I'm going to buy it online. So that's the marketplace shift that we're seeing in the world today. So that focus on making the user experience, whether it's in on your browser or in app, it needs to be simple and easy to use and cater to making the experience better, no matter like the age or demographic. I think it's the focus on that is just massive right now. So those are definitely a few of the things I would encourage everyone to look out for.
Those are fantastic insights. And in fact, AI has come so far so fast. I was double booked for this meeting, so I just spun up a quick AI bot, and this is not even me.
I believe it.
It's incredible. So that was fantastic insight. Fergus, what do you think? What do you see? What do you see kind of that data analytics adding to marketing in the next couple of years? How do we prepare?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Lavina's covered most of the points that, to be honest with you, she really did a good job there. I think, further to the point on personalization, I think we're going to move from this idea of personalization and that being an integral part of the customer experience to being a nice to have and what's the word? Distinguishing feature of a product to the expectation. I know how, happy I am when I pick up the phone to someone's customer service and they go, "Hello, Mr. Lovett, how are you?" without me even saying anything. I know how impressive that is, but that will just become the norm for organizations. And to do that, you have to have an effective data platform and the ability to access data fast and the most relevant and accurate up-to-date data as well. I think that's kind of the key thing for me is the personalization element of it. And to Lavina's point, AI as well, as that kind of continues to grow. And I think that, I know I talk about kind of picking up the phone, hello, Mr. Lover, being a nice thing. You're going to move to service through chatbots. And those chatbots need as much access to data as possible in order to provide the same service that a human being would in terms of, in terms of service. So I think those are kind of the two key areas for me of development that we'll see kind of massive improvements into the marketing analytics space.
Well, it ties into the entire business, right? As you all have really spoken about, making sure that the data is cross-functional. It's customer centric, but it's pulling in data from all different areas of the business to really provide relevant insights. So, so how can data analytics help demonstrate the value of marketing campaigns to broader business stakeholders? Anybody want to take a stab at that? Luke?
Repeat the question for me if you don't
mind.
All
right. So how can data analytics help demonstrate the value of marketing campaigns to broader business stakeholders?
Yeah. I think in most cases, executives on the business side that are making investments in marketing, maybe in years and decades past, were not as data driven, but I think that's largely kind of falling by the wayside and not the norm anymore, fortunately, especially in the middle to larger size organizations, with exceptions, obviously. But I think just fundamentally, it really gives them the picture of justifying the investment that they are making, giving them insight into where they should invest more or take away investment, and really ultimately to drive further investment, right? So if there is that proper data put in front of them, then I just think fundamentally that's what it's going to mean for marketers, is that the investment is maintained, it's optimized, and then hopefully, obviously, what every marketer and especially marketing leader wants is that investment to continue because of the belief they have in the outcome that it can produce, right?
Yeah. So, you think about, pipeline management, and pipeline management, of course, is going to funnel how many new customers ideally you end up with, which is going to impact your support teams, your success teams. Seeing engagement on a particular product maybe drives moving a strategy more into that direction versus another one. It's kind of overwhelming to me that we've got so much data out there, and yet we really haven't figured out to use it holistically across the business. So I know those of you listening have more questions. We're running close to time. I want to make sure we do leave time to answer those questions. So if you would please type those questions into the question bot, the question box, so that we have time to get there. So one last question for the panel before we get to your questions. How do we ensure that we get buy-in for data and analytics across the marketing function to make it a success? Lavina?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it all comes down to prioritization. I think, like Luke mentioned, it's that most leaders are now, very data driven. They understand the importance of using data to make those decisions. But the fact that they need to be able to prioritize in the first place, I think that having that data and accessibility, I think that's crucial. And not just, in terms of, to say you can't control what you can measure, but also in order to be able to judge the effectiveness of that particular prioritization, I think, having that data in place, or the analytics in place to be able to do that effectively, I think that's crucial as well. So if, really speaks to the need for analytics from a customer centric, standpoint, but also from a decision making and kind of, growth and development standpoint. I think, just to quickly add to that. Yeah.
I think, Elizabeth, further to that point, if we think about data analytics, it's a combination of three things, right? It's people, processes, and technology. If you get the processes right, then it will kind of make the people happy, but you also need to get the technology right as well. The technology needs to be easy to use and easy to manage. If you add in what seem like steps for the sake of extra steps, people will just ignore those steps because their job is hard enough as it is, and they don't need two or three extra steps to make their job more difficult. So I think that having something easy to use is very, very important, but also as well ensuring that when you are putting the processes in place as part of your overall strategy, don't overcomplicate it for people for the sake of it. Make it as simple and straightforward as possible, which seems straightforward, but you'd be surprised the amount of organizations who implement steps for what seem like the sake of steps.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, and if I could add one final comment, I love what Lavina says about prioritization. I think that's foundational along with education, right? So knowledge is power. And ultimately, when you're asking, how do you create buy-in? What you're essentially asking about is these changes that I'm wanting to make as a leader, how do I actually do that, right? And there's an executive friend of mine that posted recently a great video about organizational change. And he basically kind of broke the people side of it. So Fergus, when you're talking people, process, technology, the people side of it, you always have three buckets, which is those that are excited about the change and they're going to be your champions and they're going to help push that forward, from a peer level perspective. The second is kind of those that passively accept it, but they're not really supportive. And those are going to be kind of your more problem children, if you will. And then lastly is those that are just staunchly against it, inevitably will probably move on to other organizations and do different things. So then the rubber meets the road, and how do you kind of manage those three buckets? And ultimately, I think it comes back to the relationships that you have with your team and cross-functionally in the organization, kind of foundational to, OCM type principles. And really, I think it also comes down to failures and successes, right? Use examples of failures in a really gracious way to be like, and this is why, these changes need to happen, and then celebrate and incentivize those successes that ultimately will propel your organization in the direction that you want it to go.
Yeah, and I think, just to quickly add to that, one of the things that we've seen more so in the last few years is that, we live in a world where FOMO is a real thing. So to get buy-in, I feel like the quantification of that missed opportunity or that missed revenue or the missed kind of like consumers missed engagement, I feel like that speaks very strongly to, all three groups that you just mentioned, Luke, the ones that will advocate for you for the change, even like the passive kind of people on the sidelines, and even those who are just not convinced at all. I think, when you quantify that missed opportunity, when you quantify that impact, saying, hey, changing, personalization strategy or implementing personalization and improving engagement 10% is going to lead to that incremental 20% increase in revenue. I think that is just irrefutable. Like those are foolproof like numbers. It's hard to argue with those for a lot of folks. So I feel like that is one thing that is often used as well to get buy-in.
Yeah, you're exactly right. You're exactly right. Thank you. This was fantastic. That really wraps up, the questions that I had for you. We've got a few audience participant questions that have come in. So the first one is, are B2B companies better with analytics than B2C companies? And what could each learn from the other? Ooh.
I think that's a customer by customer, a company by company question, right? I would not say that in my experience that one is better than the other. I think it really does come down to each individual organization, whether they value data-driven decisions in a data-driven business or not. And then really kind of setting that foundation. Do they set that foundation well? And if they do, then regardless of whether they're B2B or B2C, I think you have good examples and bad examples in both. I do think the biggest difference, though, between the two, in a lot of ways, is really on the B2C side. When you're getting into these larger organizations, just the scale of data, I think, in a lot of ways, is truly different. Which can introduce complexities in and of itself, right? When you're starting to talk about performance, and if there's any performance metrics that are really important in that pipeline and architecture, that presents challenges that you just may not have with the size of data and activity and whatnot on the B2B side.
Yeah, good insights, Luke. Lavina or Fergus?
Yeah, I think, I'm with Luke on that. Like, I wouldn't say that there's, one that does kind of analytics and marketing data, processing better than the other. Definitely depends on the organization, but I just want to add really quickly on that. In terms of the larger organizations, it can be a real challenge sometimes, to simply because of the scale and the fact that they're more likely to have kind of information and data sitting in silos. I think it just takes it's much bigger of a push and just like a mammoth kind of task to get things moving, and especially with change. Like, change doesn't come easy, at an individual or an organization level, but to make that happen in large organizations across teams that are in silos, I feel like can be, is one of the reasons that we see certain industries and certain companies kind of like fall behind in terms of keeping up and not just implementing, but adopting technology and marketing analytics as well.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I've seen it in both B2B and B2C. I've seen companies that do it really, really well and companies that don't. And I've seen really large companies do it well and really small companies do it well, and the others that don't. But I think, some of the things that we've talked about today in creating that strategy, and truly being data driven, having that mindset across all departments is critical to success, regardless if you're B2B or B2C. So next question. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Fergus.
No, I think this is very general, by the way, and this isn't true of all organizations. But what I tend to see is the B2C sees engagement more of a fleeting affair, whereas B2B might be a bit more measured with their engagement. Which both sides can learn from each other, right? B2B could learn to be take the initiative a bit more and kind of go out there a bit better. And then B2C could learn that, maybe take your time a bit better and slow it down. But I think generally that's what kind of how the marketers treat it. B2C see it as move on to the next one. B2B is much more, right, how do we engage with this person? Because we see them as being a good customer for us.
Yeah, that's really, really good insight.
Good point.
Yeah. Excellent. All right, next question. Part of the issue is that upper management doesn't understand or have the ability to access the importance of the metrics being reported. Can you please talk to the importance of simplifying and visualizing the data to drive decision making? Excuse me. That's a good question.
Very good question.
Yeah. I can start on that one. Oh my gosh, and I can go on forever.
We only have like 15 minutes left, Lavina.
Okay, I'm going to try. But of course we want, effective visualization and kind of, the simplest form of communicating the data that we're looking at. But I think more than the simplification, I would go one step further and say we need the right data in the right context for decision makers to be able to drive their decisions. Like, it can be simple, it can be complicated. Our leaders are often, very capable and intelligent. It's truly about processing the right information that's meaningful to them, for that particular role, for the particular job, and that doesn't necessarily speak to the needs of a CEO, but even for like for growth and development, for leaders in business development, or for managers and for analysts. What is the information that we're looking for that is going to be helpful for this decision? I think understanding the needs and kind of effectively positioning that with the right information, the right context, I think that is what is missing in a lot of the dashboarding and a lot of the reporting that we're doing right now, because it's just knowledge sharing. What this means, how do we interpret this, and what is the impact of this data, right? I think that also needs to be effectively communicated within that visualization, and I feel like that's what's often missing.
So simplify it, make sure that you've got the right data in the right context, and that
at
it's
the right time.
Yeah. I certainly know as a a leader, data does not all come to me the same way. And to me, all right, so yeah, making it relevant and timely is really critical, because I know I personally have a very short attention span. So what were we doing?
I think further to that as well from Lavina, I think makes some really good points, but I think also making it simple, but then also giving people the ability to dig deeper if they want to as well. I feel like good leaders will see a snapshot and a summary and go, okay, why is that? And want to ask questions of the data. So giving them the ability to ask those questions in a way which is easy and straightforward is really, really powerful for them. So it's kind of that part of, what are you showing me? Okay, I get it. Why is this? And how do I investigate that further?
What's the next question? And
what's the next question? Exactly. Yeah. And it's always difficult to anticipate those questions, but preparing as well as you can for them, I think, is an important part of that as well.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add is just there's a difference between metrics and insights, and so part of that is creating that ability to drill into what is really the deeper why behind the metric that exists, which is the actual insight. Two is understanding the psychology of executives. I mean, Elizabeth, you just said it, your attention span is essentially, to put it a different way, it's that of a fruit fly, right? And it's because you have so many things going on that creating these insights and curating them in such a way that the executive can actually, in a very quick way, gain the overall understanding. And even if they wanted to drill into it, so there is kind of that we've talked a lot about CX and UX, and that absolutely comes into play to at that level. And I would say, last comment, I think I've seen, at least for some years, a trend towards even business leaders becoming more technical. And so I think, now on into the future, for those, business folks on the call, it is of the utmost importance to not just, there was a generational expert that I was on the board of my previous company that said it this way, that, when you look at Gen Z and millennials, it doesn't mean that they're technology experts and that they are, but actually that they are technology dependent. So it appears that they're technology experts simply because they use it all the time. I can't tell you how many Gen Z and millennial folks that I've talked to that have no idea how technology works, but they use it all the time, right? So I think it's incredibly important for, the business leaders that are listening to this webinar, that eventually listen to it. It's incredibly important to raise your level of technical prowess and understanding how technology works truly at the bits and bytes level.
Yeah, that's great. That's great feedback, Luke. All right, next question. How can I make sure I'm betting in scalability for my processes and technology to handle much greater volumes of data over time? This is a great one.
I could start.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you really can only do that based upon what you know today, right? And obviously scale may change in the future, but you can really, once again, if you have the right technology, if you have the right access to the right data, all the things that we've been saying throughout this call, then you can at least put together some sort of math equation that says, well, as of now, it exists as X and it's grown at X% for the past, month over month, quarter over quarter, year over year. And you can kind of give some idea of where it's going to be from a future planning perspective 12 months down the road. And I think it's my experience purely. I think it's hard to really get beyond that time frame. You can, but it's almost kind of like you're licking your finger and sticking it in the air and seeing like, okay, well, which way the wind blowing today. But that's the way that I've seen folks that really are planning for that scale. It really just kind of comes down to a simple math problem of what do I know today about current state as well as how the data is scaling at this point.
Yeah, that's good. And I think recognizing that the data will grow, and having a plan for that. And I've seen this in companies that I've worked for and worked with as well. The data will grow. How much data do you need? And I've seen so many organizations kind of go, we need 20 years of historical data. Why?
Yeah.
What are you using that for? Is it important? Is it really? Are you really going to go back 20 years? What insights are you gaining from 20 years worth of data? More data is not always good data, and reminding just yes, the data will grow, but asking yourself what makes sense to keep is important. Lavina or Fergus, do either of you have any additional comments on that one?
I think for me, I think that, again, the need for a unified data strategy, also focusing on scalability. I think that's important as well. So to your point, you don't need 20 years of information because that's not relevant. Like 20 years ago, that behavior, those decisions, not relevant maybe it's good to know, but for your purposes right now, not relevant at all. So I think just that understanding of what is needed and what we're doing with it, and preparing in terms of both the technology and the skill set to handle that kind of data and be ready with the right kind of insights in a timely manner. I think that's going to be crucial.
Yeah, I think further to Lavina's point, I think that having a good data strategy in place is important. But I think part of that is being ready to bring in some duds as well. Being willing to try and experiment with things so that when you kick off new strategies or you're implementing new technologies, even if they don't work, from day one, you've got the processes and you've got the strategy in place to integrate them into your overall data strategy. So if they do take off exponentially, as technology seems to do nowadays with new platforms, TikTok in the last 2 years has blown up and all that kind of stuff, having different channels and different markets, having the ability to test and think, good job we had it in here in the first place, is really, really important as well. So don't be afraid to go, we don't see that as being important and not bring it in. That's a surefire way to end up shooting yourself in the foot.
I love that one, Fergus, that, kind of don't be afraid to fail, but the ability to fail fast.
Exactly.
All right. I think we have time for one more. So the final question, we couldn't not come back to AI. So what are some of the ways that AI will impact marketing analytics in the future? And maybe even more importantly, how can marketers prepare for AI inclusion in analytics?
I can start on that one
really
quickly. So I think, so I work at Wunderman Thompson, and we're like a full service marketing agency, and analytics is a crucial part of our business, but a large part of our business is also creative development, for large clients. So one of the things where we're seeing kind of AI take over, because several folks within analytics and data certainly are familiar with AI technologies. So for us, it's we already have like a foot in the door in terms of understanding how this will impact business. But even in the non-traditional spaces of our work, where it's a creative work, we're seeing AI take over there as well, where you can kind of give certain briefs to a technology, and it'll generate imagery, that. So for a creative person, it's a huge kind of a lift off of their kind of like daily workload. So I think one of the most key impact it'll have for us in terms of business is the expectation to move and work faster. I think to have information ready faster, to have deliverables faster, to have output faster, and not just, and it's going to be standard expectation to be quick, a lot quicker than we are today.
Yeah, I mean, you look at how quickly ChatGPT has taken off. In fact, my daughter wrote her paper using it. No, just kidding. She wouldn't have. She wouldn't have done that. But I think making sure that we're keeping space for AI it is important because it's here. I do think we're all so curious about how it's going to impact everybody's world, all of the different, cross-functional areas of our departments. It's here, but I think, exactly how is still yet to kind of be determined. But Lavina, I agree. It's going to allow us to move faster. And she only got a C on that paper, so it's okay. We're not all.
So still, the model still needs to be trained better. Is that what you're telling me? Yeah, no, I'd love to comment on this because I had the good fortune in my previous role, and even some in this role, to be a part of predictive type of projects. And I think the foundational thing that I would say to anybody who's saying, hey, this AI thing kind of came from academia, and so it was theoretical for years and years and years, and now use cases are actually becoming more and more prevalent across lots of different businesses, actually finding practical value. Now in the world today, we see that more widespread. What should I do about this, right? Foundationally educate yourself on AI, and don't go and listen to like a Wikipedia. Like, good data is what's important here, right? So you can never go wrong with peer reviewed academic studies. You can never go wrong with reputable sources that have gained widespread credence across the world to being a reputable source, but educate yourself on it, because I think lots of people, there's so much misunderstanding of what AI actually is. And the reality is ChatGPT is not something that has its own mind as much as we would like for us to think that it does. It was trained on a very, very, very large data set that has its problems within the data, that creates certain biases that we talk about in ethical AI and stuff like that. But it absolutely does not have its own mind. A computer will not do anything. Like, think about your laptop, and it's just sitting there before you actually turn it on and do anything with it. It's not just going to autonomously start to do stuff. It only does what it's told to do. And when it comes to robots and stuff like that, it's the same thing. They are programmed and trained to do certain things. So first and foremost is educate yourself on AI, which then will inform how you actually use it in your MarTech stack and in your marketing strategy now and moving forward.
Thanks, Luke. Although, I don't know. I think we're getting there. Teasing. All right.
I think
that is. Oh, sorry, Fergus. Did you have one more?
No, I just think, further to Luke's point, I think just as like a general thing, the people who will do kind of the best out of AI in the next 2 to 3 years won't be the people who try and replace their own jobs with AI. It'll be the people who try and improve their own jobs through AI, make themselves more efficient, understand how AI can help them do more with less resources, and understand how AI can make them better at their jobs. So don't.
Such a good point.
If you go into AI as this thing that's like, oh, it's going to replace me, I'm going to be robot marketers by 2030, then that will happen. Whereas if you go in and think, how can I be a better marketer, then that's a surefire way to use it well.
I couldn't agree more, Fergus. And that really, we are right at time now. So thank you.
Such good questions.
I know. Thank
Great
you,
question.
Josh, Luke, and Fergus, and Lavina so much for sitting
Thank you.
through and answering some of
Yeah,
those
thanks,
questions.
Elizabeth.
Some really valuable insight. It's important to create a strategy around our marketing data, especially making sure that we have the right data and the right context delivered to the right people, and making sure that it's relevant. So thank you all so much for joining us today, and take care.
Thanks, everyone.
So much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.